First of all, CISA saying this attack represents a grave risk to our national security. Describe that risk for us. How vulnerable are we right now?
Well, Emily, I think it's a watershed event for security. We've talked about supply chain risk for some time. We've seen it with the NotPetya attack in 2017. And this is one of the most sophisticated attacks that we've seen ever. Incredibly patient, incredible tradecraft, and lots of companies potentially impacted, including the government. So I think it really shines a light on how interwoven our economy is in the physical world and the digital world, and how important cybersecurity is in our daily lives.
Now, we hear attacks all the time, and I think it's really hard for, sort of regular people to understand the threat. It seems like, this is, sort of always happening in cyberspace. What makes this hack in particular so pernicious?
Well, the hard part for most folks to really understand in the electronic world is what's happening. If there was a nuclear explosion somewhere, someone would obviously see that and have a reaction to it. What happens behind the scenes as electrons flow about is tough, but this is a massive attack, a long sustained campaign with tradecraft that was superb. So it's hard for the average person to really understand it, but to have this level of access for so long across so many different companies is probably unprecedented. And I think it really shines a light on how important cybersecurity is, and the fact that it's not about just having a system that's infected. It really gets to the business resiliency question that companies are often grappling with at the board level.
Now, we're still trying to get a handle on just how many companies, agencies, entities were impacted here. SolarWinds has said, 18,000 customers potentially downloaded this software, but it is a smaller subset of that that actually hackers got in through the back door. I just spoke with Microsoft President Brad Smith. Microsoft also noticed the fingerprints of the hackers inside their system, but said they didn't get through that back door. Take a listen to what he had to say about what he thinks the scale of this will be.
Right now, we've identified more than 40. We're going to see that go up. I'll be surprised if this is something in the thousands. It's more likely to be between several dozen and several hundred.
George, would you agree with that the number of entities where the hackers actually got in that back door will be somewhere between, several dozen and several hundred?
Well, I think there's a bit of good news here. You've got 18,000 potential customers that SolarWinds has, and this was a very targeted attack. I think the vast majority of them won't see an activation of that malware or hadn't seen an activation of that malware over that period of time. Obviously, everyone's encouraged to upgrade, and SolarWinds has been very transparent in trying to get this fixed and work with their customers. But that being said, I think it's going to take some time, weeks or longer, to figure out if there is an impact, if people actually had this vulnerable version. And I think that's why it's important for companies to have the right level of security and visibility on their endpoints and workloads to understand what's actually happening there, and then be able to go back in time forensically if they need to investigate if there was a potential incident. So it's a pretty fluid situation, and I think it's going to be an evolving situation over the next coming weeks and perhaps months.
Okay, so given the extended timeline, President Trump hasn't commented on this issue at all. President-elect Biden says it will be a top priority. He's not taking office for a month. Is that too late?
Well, I think the government folks are doing the best job they can in identifying this and working through the various agencies. Again, this was such a sophisticated attack. It takes time. Where do you have those vulnerable versions? Have they been activated? Has someone moved about the network? It all takes time and investigative power to do that. And again, I know, unfortunately, a lot of folks are going to be working over the holidays to figure out if there's really any impact, and hopefully it's much lower than we think, but we'll know over the coming weeks.
Now, CrowdStrike shares have been up every day over the last week, in part because of the role that you can play in helping protect companies from future attacks. But what does this actually mean for your business?
Well, I think what it shows in terms of security in general is that it's equivalent to shelter. It's in the hierarchy of needs, you have to have it. And whether there's a vaccine or not, whether people are working from home or not, security is only going to get bigger and bigger in terms of a necessary element for companies. Digital transformation, keeping their customers safe, keeping their data safe. And I think what it also shows is that the environment, the threat environment continues to evolve. It's hand-to-hand combat with the adversaries. They get good, we have to be better, and we go back and forth. But technologies that leverage artificial intelligence and the power of the cloud, I think, have a much greater advantage in trying to identify and prevent these sort of breaches.
Now, SolarWinds was, at least as far as we know right now, the primary vector here. But doesn't this mean that basically any company that provides software could be a vector for a hack of this nature on this scale?
Well, that's the hard part with the supply chain attack because, it's injected in the top level of supply chain and the software, and it becomes very difficult to detect these. And that's why it's incumbent on all vendors to be able to look at their build process, their own security, to make sure they have things locked down. We've seen this attack, a similar attack in 2017. That was a destructive attack, but it gave the world, I think, a glimpse, the NotPetya attack I'm referring to. It gave the world a glimpse of what can happen in a supply chain attack. And that's why it's so nasty. And the thing is, they were very patient. They waited, they, activated when they needed to. They blended in from an identity perspective like every other user. And identity security is really important as well. It's one of the reasons why we did our Preempt acquisition to really focus on identity security and locking down directories. And I think, that shows how important it is to companies. It's not only about the malware, it's also about the identity and the directories, which have to be protected.
Now, in terms of the impact, the understanding is these hackers have now stolen such a large amount of personal data. That means, potentially huge disinformation campaigns at a super targeted scale. What are the actual consequences of a hack like this? What consequences will this particular hack have?
I think that remains to be seen. It's one of those in the fog of war. You understand one particular battle. You don't know what the war is going to look like. And I think as more and more information comes out on the size and scale and sophistication, we're going to see a greater impact. Was data stolen? Was IP stolen? Were there other supply chains compromised? I think it's just too early to tell. Obviously, there isn't an IT group on the planet who isn't looking at their systems now, trying to understand whether they had that software, whether there was an impact, and whether data was stolen or whether there's malicious activity that took place. And that's the hard part about this. Not only can data be stolen, but these sort of attacks can be implemented in a way that you can actually destroy systems or destroy data, which again gets back to my point about business resiliency, right? It's not just about data theft. It's about keeping your business safe and up and running, which is really top of mind for all boards right now.
So you released a report earlier this month talking about the staggering volume of attacks this year. What awaits us in 2021? What will the threat landscape look like?
Well, it's unfortunately every year we go through these predictions, us and every other security company, and it keeps getting worse. And it gets worse in the area of sophistication of the adversary. If you take e-crime as an example, it's a massive, probably $1 trillion business at this point. And what we've seen is that the adversary has been able to take a lot of the nation state tradecraft and even exploits that have been leaked on the internet and weaponize those and deliver them in the form of ransomware. And there is a massive business in the ransomware business, taking systems down, extorting companies for big dollars. And it isn't $300 and you're up and running. It's $3 million, it's $5 million, it's $10 million where these ransoms are coming in. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that because it's big business and low risk. And then, we're going to see a lot more on the nation states. I think this is going to wake a lot of people up to say, what else is going on? Where else do we need to look?